They were the only unit in World War II that is capable of creating a 30-ton tank out of thin air in less than 20 minutes. The Germans thought they were facing a massive armored division, but they were actually fighting a group of art school dropouts armed with balloons. When the Allied forces landed in Europe, they brought with them the usual assortment of heavy infantry, armored divisions, and paratroopers. But buried deep within the confidential files of the U.S. Army was a unit so secret that its existence wasn't officially declassified until the mid-1990s. They were known officially as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but history remembers them by a much cooler name, the Ghost Army. Unlike the other guys storming the beaches, these men weren't selected for their marksmanship or their physical strength. They were recruited from art schools in New York and Philadelphia. They were painters, set designers, sound engineers, and advertising executives. Their mission wasn't to kill the enemy. It was to drive them completely insane. The premise of their operation sounds like a fever dream or ejected plot from a Looney Tunes cartoon. Their job was to impersonate other Allied units to deceive the German High Command. If General Patton needed to move his tanks to the north for a surprise attack, the Ghost Army would set up shop in the south and pretend to be Patton's army. But how do you fake a 30,000-man army when you only have 1,000 guys? You use the tools of the theater. They arrived on the battlefield with hundreds of inflatable rubber tanks, fake airplanes made of canvas and wood, and massive speakers. While the real soldiers were sneaking away in the dark, these artists were pumping up balloons that looked terrifyingly realistic from a reconnaissance plane at 5,000 feet. The visual deception was a masterpiece of practical effects. These inflatable tanks, known as dummies, were meticulously designed to cast the perfect shadow. From the air, a German pilot couldn't tell the difference between a Sherman tank made of steel and one made of rubber. But the illusion required maintenance. The tanks would sag if the air pressure dropped, so you would have the surreal sight of soldiers frantically using bicycle pumps to keep their armored division looking fierce. Sometimes the wind would pick up, and these 30-ton steel beasts would start bouncing around the field like beach balls, or a soldier would casually lift an entire tank over his head with one hand to move it, creating a truly bizarre spectacle for anyone watching. But visuals were only half the battle. To truly fool the Germans, the Ghost Army had to master the art of sound. This was the birth of the sonic deception. They recorded the sounds of armored columns, tank treads screeching on pavement, and sergeants shouting orders on state-of-the-art wire recorders. They then mounted massive 500-pound speakers on the back of half-tracks speakers, so powerful they could be heard from 15 miles away. They would drive these sound trucks to the front lines at night and blast the audio of a moving army. To the Germans listening in the distance, it sounded exactly like a massive American force was moving into position for an attack, causing them to panic and move their own troops to defend a position that was completely empty. The level of detail they put into this performance was obsessive. It wasn't enough to just look and sound like an army. They had to act like one too. This was called special effects, but it was really just method acting. Soldiers from the Ghost Army would go into local French towns, visit the cafes and bars where they knew Nazi spies were lurking, and pretend to be loose-lipped generals. They would wear the patches of the units they were impersonating, sewing on new insignias every few days, and accidentally drop hints about a major offensive happening in the wrong location. They were spinning a web of lies so thick that even the locals were convinced the entire American army had moved into their backyard. However, we have to remember the immense danger these artists were in. It sounds funny now fighting a war with balloons, but the threat was deadly serious. Their job was to draw enemy fire. They were deliberately trying to get the Germans to attack them. If the deception worked too well, a German panzer division might roll over the hill and open fire. The Ghost Army had no heavy weapons, no real tanks, and no armor. They were sitting ducks protected only by a layer of rubber and their own wits. If the Germans realized the trick, they would have been slaughtered instantly. They were effectively playing a high-stakes game of poker with Hitler, bluffing with a pair of twos against a royal flush. One of their greatest masterpieces took place near the end of the war. During the crossing of the Rhine River, the U.S. Ninth Army needed to cross into Germany, but the German defenses were too strong. The Ghost Army was called in to pull off a massive distraction. They set up over 600 inflatable tanks and artillery pieces 10 miles south of the actual crossing point. They blasted sound effects all night long. They even built a fake airfield with fake planes. The Germans took the bait hook, line, and sinker. They moved their heavy artillery to shell the ghost positions, leaving the real crossing point lightly defended. The Ninth Army crossed with minimal casualties, all because the Germans were busy blowing up balloons. It is fascinating to look at the roster of men who served in this unit. Because they recruited from the arts, the Ghost Army was full of future celebrities. Bill Blass, who would go on to become a world-famous fashion designer, was in the unit. Ellsworth Kelly, the renowned minimalist painter, was there too. You can actually see the influence of the war in their later work. Kelly credits his time designing camouflage patterns and working with shadows as a major influence on his abstract art. It is a strange irony that some of the most beautiful art and fashion of the 20th century was conceptually born in the muddy trenches of Europe, created by men who were using their creativity to hide from mortar fire. For decades, nobody knew about this. The mission was classified top secret. When the soldiers came home, they couldn't tell their wives or children what they did. They just said they were in the supply corps or did logistics. It wasn't until 1996, more than 50 years after the war ended, that the documents were finally declassified and the world learned about the Ghost Army. Imagine keeping a secret that big for your entire adult life. You saved tens of thousands of lives. You pulled off the greatest magic trick in history, and you couldn't even brag about it at a dinner party. They were the silent heroes who let the other guys take the glory. The existence of the Ghost Army challenges our traditional view of warfare. We usually think of war as a contest of brute strength. Who has the biggest gun, the fastest plane, the most soldiers? But the Ghost Army proved that war is also a contest of the mind. It's about perception. By controlling what the enemy saw and heard, they controlled the enemy's reality. They proved that a paintbrush could be just as effective as a rifle if used correctly. They weaponized psychology and turned the Germans' own caution and reconnaissance against them. It was a victory of intellect over high explosives. There is a specific photo from the archives that captures the essence of this story perfectly. It shows 4 soldiers lifting a Sherman tank. The first time you see it, your brain rejects it. It looks like a glitch in the Matrix or a photoshopped image. But then you realize it's real well. The photo is real. The tank is not. That image encapsulates the surreal nature of their war. While the rest of the world was dealing with the heavy, crushing reality of death and destruction, these guys were operating in a world of illusion, creating a theater of the absurd in the middle of a bloodbath. The legacy of the Ghost Army is estimated in lives saved. Military historians estimate that their deception saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. That is 30,000 men who got to go home, get married, and have children because a bunch of artists tricked the Nazis into shooting at the wrong target. It is a staggering number. They didn't win the war by taking territory. They won it by buying time and preserving manpower. They were the ultimate force multipliers, making the American Army look twice as big and twice as dangerous as it actually was, causing the German command to freeze in indecision. In the end, the story of the Ghost Army is a testament to human creativity under pressure. It shows that even in the rigid, regimented world of the military, there is room for out-of-the-box thinking. The U.S. Army, an organization known for its strict rules and standard procedures, took a gamble on a bunch of creative types and let them run wild. It was a rare moment where the misfits were exactly who the world needed. They didn't fit the mold of the perfect soldier, and that was exactly their strength. They looked at the battlefield not as a map of targets, but as a canvas to be painted. So the next time you hear about the heroes of World War II, look past the generals with the medals and the pilots with the aces. Spare a thought for the guys in the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the guys who carried sound effects records instead of grenades, the guys who stitched together fake patches and painted fake insignias. They remind us that deception is an art form, and that sometimes the best way to defeat your enemy isn't to destroy them, but to make them chase ghosts until they have nothing left to fight. It remains one of the most unique, creative, and brilliantly weird chapters in military history.